Hi guys, my name is Borodante, and welcome back to Overpain, which means I go through my Patreon page and check out several of your guys' submissions, trying to give you some advice and maybe improving the artwork. Now this time I selected 3 pieces from Basia Art, Nakras, and Ariadne Zonaku? I'm great at this. And one theme that combines these 3 pictures is skin. Shading the skin in different setups and different goals, with complex lighting. How do we work with skin? So let's cover that a little bit, while of course paying attention to the other things that the authors wanted to pay attention to. So we'll read up and see what's up. This video is sponsored by Skillshare. Let's start. Hello again, Boro. Hi, Basia. I hope you're doing well. I'm pretty good. This is a painting I created quite some time ago. I wanted to add it to my portfolio. I thought it would be wise to repaint it a little as my skills improved since the time I painted it. I thought maybe you could take a look at it and help me spot the major mistakes and stuff so that I can really improve it. And yeah, the portfolio was due on June 3rd and Basia asked me to maybe work on the submission earlier, but I totally couldn't do that, so let's do that now. Now, before we move to Photoshop, I want to real quick tell you guys about the sponsor of this video, Skillshare, and share my side of the experience and what I found interesting about it. It sort of creates this environment that has a pretty free context, but it's highly curated and has a high quality control. For instance, I found this one course from Roman Muradov, and he is a very high-profile illustrator that's been working for New Yorker, New York Times, and Google, and many other very big clients. And one interesting thought that he had to share was that style is content. This is what an artist does. Artists don't tell stories. If we do, we're also storytellers or writers. That's a separate thing that we may be doing. But the pure value of an illustrator, of an artist, is in the way you show things. Something that's literally impossible to describe verbally. And if you really focus your energy and attention to this aspect, you will be a much more valuable artist. And I think it's a very interesting thought, and I'm looking forward to watching more videos from Roman and many others to see what other inspiring and interesting ideas I can come across. If any of you guys are interested, the link to Skillshare is in the video description. Keep in mind that if you join it, you get the first month for free, so you can really have some time to experience it and see if it really works for you or not. Now back to Overpain. Alright, let me copy the original here. I'm doing that because I'm seeing a certain issue with the image, with the way, the skin, the bodies are shaded. And a lot of the times this issue of like a problem with the skin, like when you look at it, you would describe it as muddy colors, muddy shading. So certain tints of color, like right here, it looks dirty, like it needs to be more saturated, kind of brighter. And what I found interesting that a lot of the times when you try to fix this, you may as well not touch the colors, but what you should be touching is the values, just the brightness. Like this leg is dirty right now, not because there's this gray color, but because it's not in the right place. It just shouldn't happen so quickly. Light propagates a lot softer, and like the gradient of the way it falls off a lot of the times should be, much more favorable of the bright part of it and not the dark one. And yeah, that's where the brushwork, the shape design really comes in handy as well, because it's all about the shape of the shadow. If you're working like, if you're studying skin or making a portrait from a photo, from any kind of reference, make sure you pay high attention, not necessarily to colors, because really the way usually 101 way of shading skin is being taught is that you sort of go from brighter, more yellow to darker, more red and more saturated, and somewhere in between there will be like this gradient, so like that's kind of your skin shading. Basic one. No one of course says that it just applies everywhere the same way and that's it. humans are not just some kind of balloons with uniform liquid and that's it. Things vary everywhere. But the big deal is how little of this gradient of translucency we can actually see in real-world examples. So it affects shading very little. Like, you don't see a lot of like shades of orange glow on my face right now. You know, it's not a thing. You can see much more of just, you know, the gradient of bright light from this side and darker from this one. And, you know, no matter how much you would like change the color of lighting, you just won't see too much of the skin itself making that much of a difference. It's about the colors of light. If we go with dark skin, it's more about just shading reflections, and there's a lot less confusion about how little skin actually affects the color. It's much more about what the environment of the skin is. But thing is, it's really close to that in white skin as well. It's much more about what colors of light shading your skin and how exactly the light falls off. So yeah, I would really focus a lot more on just that. If anything, try to make like the black and white version look not muddy. That's an interesting thing to also focus on. Like, if you look at the black and white version of the original, this still looks muddy. So it has very little to do with hue. Is the shade that's muddy. And yeah, all these phenomena of like translucency of skin, like where we get some orange, and Bastia actually used it correctly. It was done with like a separate brush on a separate layer, I think, with like maybe overlay mode, maybe something like that. Right here, like on very sharp changes between light and dark. So that's really one part where you should be introducing that. So after I'm done with like fixing the values, if I would spend like a bunch of time with it, I would come in, like grab this middle color, make it a bit brighter and more saturated, move it closer to like orange and some like that, you know, maybe even stronger, and make sure that the effect is very subtle, very careful, because humans are not balloons with liquid and we're not candles. All the stuff, while of course can be exaggerated in a painting for the sake of artistic content of it, something I talked about when I talked about Skillshare, that this is really like something you can introduce on top of what you see in reality. So that will be your valuable thing, but you have to fine-tune it. And generally, you know, any art style, it should never be based on just a series of mistakes. You should know how to do things right fundamentally before you break those rules and emphasize certain things, simplify and all that. Oh, so much better. I finally found peace in how I want this interface to be. I'm seeing a lot of the times, Bastia, you have very like flat shading areas, especially when it goes bright. That's really like, you should really avoid doing that. Bright parts are the parts where people look most at, because that's where light is pointed at, that's the spotlight. You really wanna make sure there's gradient on it. Even if you wanna generally make it, you know, like soft light, where the light doesn't fall off too much, and that's exactly, you know, in here the light was falling off too much and it looks either metallic or just dirty. And generally metallic surfaces, they have this stronger fall off, while non-metallic and like generally soft lighting, it like this area will be almost flat, but don't actually keep it flat. It needs to still have like from this brightness to a little bit, and everywhere softly, gently a little bit, it will be falling off until we reach that terminator, and then we fall off much faster. So in here, like this is flat, then suddenly getting dark, and then suddenly getting bright, and again almost flat. That's the shading of soft, light, and non-glossy, non-metallic surfaces. And yeah, the whole idea of like going a bit more red and a bit more saturated as we go darker, it still makes sense. A lot of the times it's still necessary to introduce a little bit of that. But what's surprising is actually not because that's where the skin is translucent. It happens a lot more because of the bouncing light. For instance, in here, light bounces between this and this a lot of the times. That's why we would be getting a very dirty shadow here if we wouldn't count for that. So again, it's more about ray tracing than translucency of the surface. And in here, you see that also reflected light bounced back here. This part of the face is lit by this color. It's already lit by the light of a skin color. That's why it gets more saturated and all that. And a lot darker because any reflection of a light removes like 2/3 of its brightness at least. So yeah, it's a lot of little rules you need to be following, and then you'll find out that like you're putting these saturated colors just in the right places, but in here it really would make a very bad decision to go more saturated and more red in the shadow here. It makes no sense. Why is it getting orange in there, I overdid it to make my point much more believable, but really, because there's really dark environment in there, and it's also blue, although it almost won't affect. We kind of have the tint of blue color in here almost. Yeah, we're getting to this colder shades of red now. It actually shouldn't really happen. I don't think it would really affect that, but generally it would be just a dark shadow and none of that redding and more saturating kind of thing at all, because in there's no reflection from another part of the skin. And yeah, finally, one part of the special colors that are different from just the basic skin color as that we choose, just one hue. Another place to change the hue is when the reflections hit. And reflections hit on the dark side of the skin. That's where reflections become strong enough comparing to the darker skin color that you can actually see them. And that's where you see I'm blending in this completely stray color of being blue. I'm not accounting for what the color of the actual skin is, because it doesn't matter. That's like you have no power here situation, and it's just about reflections, and we have a lot of blue environments, so the reflections will be kind of blue a little bit. Now for the second patient, Nakras. Bonjour, Boho. Bonjour, Nakras. Vic. So here's the thing, right? I planned out a big scene using Blender because I wanted to push my limits to try... Is this a description to this picture? Because I wanted to push my limits to try something with complex lighting and study how light interacted with the surfaces and do proper perspective. And then Blender crashed and I lost everything. Oh, okay. Yeah, that's a bummer. Make sure to save frequently. So I bring you this instead. It's not really something that I'd say challenged my understanding of lighting and stuff, but I wanted to submit it because there's always room for improvement, and I'm curious what you think could be worked on. Loster is doing work for me here. Only thing that sticks out to me is something looks only a little broke with his right arm. Yeah, the hand. I noticed that. Yeah, you see, like the angle is a bit off since the gun is looking straight at us with its side. The hand also should be like this, but it's really more like this a little bit. So that's a bit of a problem of angles. Interesting way of like cutting off the legs like this. Honestly, it looks pretty good. I do still, of course, have to do this. Like, a little bit more space in here is absolutely necessary, if you ask me. Oh yeah, and I would also, if we talk about cropping, I feel like the angle is too strong, like this ellipse shape should be a bit more flat in this case. So still, of course, noticeably rounded, but not nearly as much as it used to be. And yeah, aside from the hand here, overall I really like the style and the way the character looks, but I feel like we could really push it a bit forward, just introducing the colors that would really put the skin into a real full color space. Right now it's almost like there is no particular color of the skin. You know, we have red outlines, We have blue shadows, we have certain redness, but it's all like not really following the real rules. And if we apply the technique that I described in the previous submission, it would really introduce the presence of the skin and we would see it way better. It's a very interesting effect if you really follow that kind of stuff. But first, let's talk about the hand. I can see there's not only the hand issue. If we follow the bone of the forearm, it kind of goes like this, and then it breaks and it actually goes like this. And that's where the elbow is now. So we really need to solve that. I don't want to move the elbow away. I feel like this is a good, strong character pose with a stronger pointy elbow. So let's instead change this curve and make it straight. And another thing about too strong of a cylinder ovals, the way you had in here, this is also too strong. Again, we're looking at the hand from the front. If anything, it wouldn't even be a mistake to make it completely, literally flat lines in here. Because these things, they need to follow the actual condition of the geometry, in order to make sense. Oh yeah, that's going much better. Only I did something very weird with the thumb. Let's see what we can do in here real quick with the fingers. Because really, I feel like only the fingers actually dictate the angle of this hand right now. Considering generally the style is not ultra precise for the way the anatomy goes, And right here, you see I'm removing this dirty color and I'm instead using this more saturated because that's wrinkles or like folds between two surfaces of a skin color. So they'll introduce that more saturated skin lighting in these parts. And let's add a little detail of the fingernail. I found like if you wanna show the fingernails from a distance where, the distance is big enough where we have this kind of like big and chumpy kind of brush strokes. So it makes no sense to draw, a perfect thing. This will always look terrible. Again, emphasizing to make my point look better, but really what you should be doing is first like paint the nail-free finger and then grab a bit of a darker color and just add a little shadow over here. And then go the opposite way and in here, same way. These little shadows on the sides, that's really the only thing the nail can bring to the, bigger scale shading of the finger. And if anything, we can really, like this side can really be emphasized a little bit. There you go. You have an actual nail on the finger that doesn't look like something that's way over defined with way higher contrast than it should have, And yeah, in here with the skin, we exactly see this effect of being bright and like of a yellow color, but all the shadows of the skin are just painted with the dark red. That's pretty much the 101 way of doing it, But let's make a little experiment like on the face specifically. What if I grab all of it? I wonder if I can like use Photoshop and really go brutally specific on the way I would make the whole skin of the same color first. So I'll colorize and choose the skin color. Like let's say this is the skin color. Maybe I'll right away make it a bit brighter. No, I will use curves for that. So I'll just do this. I'll increase the middle brightness, like pushing it upwards in the middle. That's like increasing gamut. That's way too strong, let's tone it down. Something like this. And I'll remove it from the eyes and such, because we're only doing the skin. Eyebrows as well, although they're just painted with red color again. So there you go, instead of this, we're having this. Now I will also work on, right now we have this basic color of the skin, like one color, just shades of the same color and that's it, no gradients at all. But you do have like this more of a violet color around the eyes, which is just that the skin is colorful. So I'm gonna bring it back maybe by just literally erasing and bringing it back like this, and a little bit of the nose itself. If anything, I could do it myself. Let's like use the color mode. And yeah, just going more red around all this. I wonder how much intention was behind this, but he looks a little bit like he's sick, maybe allergic, or just, I don't know, a drug addict kind of thing. A rock star look. So this is the thing about this face. It looks really cool because of that kind of dark a little bit, how do you put it, mischievous or something. Like something dark about it, I like it. I think it's really cool to keep it. And yeah, at this point, I'll just keep shading it and making sure I follow all the logics behind the way light should propagate, So yeah, what's interesting, in this case right here, the nostril actually looks more to the light angle than the cheek behind it. So I'm sort of inversing the shading in here. In here you had this space brighter than this, but really in here there's like a fold. The skin sort of curves away a little bit, this smiling wrinkle, right? And this is actually looking up now while this is looking sideways. So actually the nostril will be, or is this a nostril, like the nose's wing? It will be looking more towards the light in here. And we have these stronger curves in these spaces right now. So that's where there will be a good place to introduce some translucency effects. I'm guessing, there we go, this is the good color. And pay attention to like how subtle this introduction of saturated red is. And yeah, I can go ahead and just even go like this crazy strong color a tiny little bit. And in here between the two folds, I'll increase that saturation as well for the bouncing light effect. And yeah, I'm just using an eraser to introduce back that red color where it actually makes sense just for again, the actual color of the skin itself. So lips, ears, nose, and around the eyes. A little translucency on the lip. Whoop. Also, I'll desaturate the skin color a little bit to introduce like the cooler color of unshaved face kind of thing, because you kind of had a hint to that in the original, only the skin went blue even on the neck. So it just looks cool. And it's like the lighting from the bottom was blue, I guess, but it's not very consistent in that regard, so I'm not sure how to follow that. Kind of like this. And yeah, so in the end we get quite a lot of variation of color, but it's all done like intentionally and with understanding why we're doing it. So highlights are of a bit of a different, like more pale color than normal, introducing variation that way. And then very subtle tiny spots of translucency, but you really need to be careful with those a little bit. This is mostly like the color of the surface, if anything. I could also add that a little bit in here. And yeah, with the highlights, also the reflections on the edges, like, I don't know, maybe we would introduce a little bit of reflection in here because this is the dark side of the face. Maybe, a little bit of that going on. Possible. That's just an example, of course. That yellow hood or whatever it is, it's definitely not bright enough or there enough, like at the good enough angle to actually introduce such a strong reflection. And now for the final patient today, Ariadne. Hello, Boro. Hi, Ariadne. I'm a rookie illustrator, and I love everything horror, macabre, and disturbing. This is my latest painting, a fan art of an amazing video game, Vigil: The Longest Night. I feel like the bandages on the creature's head and shoulders, as well as the nails lack something that would make them look more realistic. Bandages and nails, I see. Oh wow, that really freaked me out. Confused me, like, why did the image got copied with this weird custom shape? And that's just the black corners of the image. I do feel like I want to start with changing this arm a little bit, like the distribution of angles. I'm not sure if this particular boss, it seems like they have much longer forearms than the shoulders, but I feel like maybe a little bit of this would make a bit more sense, since we want to show that the giant is reaching for our main character, and when you're reaching for something, you don't stick out the elbow like this, you're reaching. So I feel like this already dictates that gesture a bit more. Now, I feel like I want to start with making the bandages actually white, or like brighter than the skin. Even though these bandages can be like really old and dirty, I feel like the skin of this giant is very far from very light and pale. He's like this gross, old kind of skin dude. And yeah, I can see you have very strong, again, almost metallic shading on the bandages, especially on the head. So yeah, one thing you can definitely make sure to follow to improve the appearance of, you know, you have a complex object, somewhere it's skin, somewhere it's some kind of yellow things, red nails, white bandages, red blood, and like differently colored surfaces in very complex lighting. Like we have cold light from the side, normal white light somewhere in the middle, and warm light coming from this lamp right here of the main character. And in all of this variation of lighting, it's very easy to lose the actual colors of surfaces and actually make them different. The skin is darker than these white bandages, and so we need to make sure it's always true in all situations. Another thing, I feel like the picture would really benefit from making the light way darker in here. Let's say, you know, we can see this frame of a cave, and inside of this cave it's like darker in there, so most of that bright ambient blue light that's coming from the back, it will stay in the back, and this arm, this hand, is reaching towards the dark cave, so generally the ambience will be much darker, and only the bright light of this lamp in the character's hand will be introducing the main lighting for this hand, and I feel like it will really improve the looks of it. And yeah, I would support the silhouette a little bit stronger with this, like reflections of the ambience. But generally, I think it's starting to look pretty dope. One thing I would really advise to do when it comes to complex lighting like this, first of all, make sure you look for where the darkness is. There should always be a space for darkness. Like right now, I came up with the idea that the ambience in this frontal plane of the arm will be much darker because of the cave, and that's how I introduced the strong, interesting contrast on the hand that makes it really stick out and stand out from the rest of the giant. But another thing is also about approaching the lighting of the skin as just like a statue, the way we saw in the reference in the very first submission today. You just think of everything as of just the same color, because you really need to work with a lot of like colorful lights first. So in that regard, I would be working with like a colder ambience on top in here and warmer like this orange light from the lamp would be like this even maybe, you know, maybe not. And the point of this is that skin is generally a pretty subtle color. Even though we have this giant skin being very far from, you know, very white and pale, it's still like not a red flag or something. It's pretty pastel. What it means is you can kind of approach it as if it's just pure white and neglect thinking about it for a while, because there's a much more important thing to deal with right now, which is, you know, all these complex blendings of different colors of lighting. So you first solve that, and then on top of it, if it looks too pale and wrong, like for instance, our bandages will be the same brightness as the skin, then we add the new layer in multiply mode and choose the skin color that we wanna have and paint on top of all of the skin. And this approach would give you the colorful light that's lighting up the colorful skin. So you see, we still have the transition from blue to orange, while altogether this is not a pure white skin lit by this, but a much darker. This is way too dark because it was already at proper colors to begin with, so I'm gonna tone all of this down altogether, but this is something to use as a trick to make sure you have proper transitions of lighting with the proper transition of surface colors. And by the way, in here, I wouldn't go all that bright with like white highlights. Don't do that. Just go like this. It still needs to show up kind of dark. How do I explain this? Here's the guy with the light in his hand. That's our main character. And the hand is going on top of it. So this nail is behind the character already, so we're seeing the dark side of the nail. That's what's facing us. In order to show that, there should be no bright highlights on this snail. Maybe that wasn't the intention, maybe all of the hand is actually in front of the main character, but I feel like this is definitely a pretty cool way to go. You see, I can show this really cool translucency of the nail with like the shadow cast from the fingers. It's pretty sick. Like, this is the best thing ever to do in this situation. Now, about the bandages, that's the same thing I talked about in the first submission, like tone down this variation of values, like it's way too strong. We need to work with much more subtle, much more flat gradients here. And there will never be such dark, like black lines in between details, because it's just a white surface on white surface, the light bounces around in there, and it's all really bright. You know, this looks super muddy just because of these too dark of a shadows that suddenly happen where there is no justification for it. And yeah, a little bit of thought, like on the very edge of things, we would see like a little folding going on, you know, so it would look three-dimensional there. And yeah, I'll go with the consistency of the rim lighting from the blue ambience, so I'll be adding that a little bit. Bandages are white generally, so like whatever the color is in the back, that will be the color on this rim lighting, rim reflection. Don't even need to think about blending it with like the skin color or something. And yeah, overall, I really like the shading you have in here, like you found this dark space that shows three-dimensional feeling. I would, you know, use this model of light on the rest of the torso here as well. Like, why not shade in such a dark fashion in here as well? Like, immediately way better look just by doing that. could maybe use a bit darker shading in here, you know, to follow the same model of shading as the skin, you know, with the blue rim lighting over there, dark here, and then getting brighter. So just follow the light with everything. Follow the light. And always make sure that the bandages are brighter than the skin. I feel like this one is for some reason really dark. Pretty much the brightness of the skin itself, it should be brightened up more. Like there may be like a darker cloth used on this arm, but I don't know if it should be darker, but if it should be the same, this is what you do. You make it brighter. It's not really about, you know, the main color that you chose for the bandages. It's about, like, the color of certain shadow details that suddenly become really, really dark, and you can't really make a conclusion. Is it brighter or darker? Like, it's very strong, like it's painted to look vintage. With deeper shadows than they should be, you know, and this way it actually looks white. So again, about the propagation of the light, and generally if you're overwhelmed with the amount of colorful lights and colorful surfaces, separate those two stages of work. First work on the colorful lights and then use multiply mode to tone it down, but keep in mind to use the multiply coloring of the surfaces before you then add reflections like this, because these things shouldn't follow the color. Like even you see the red blood, it becomes just a pale highlight. So this highlight is not colored by the red blood. Reflections on the edges and here as well would go pale blue, even though this is supposed to be the color of the skin. Reflections don't get colorized by that. So first only show dry lighting without highlights, without glossy reflections. Then colorize those surfaces and then add those glossy reflections on top. Mostly it's about adding these rim lights, rim reflections. Okay then, that'll be it for today. Thank you guys, Basia Art, Nakras, and Ariande something for your submissions. Really fun to work with, like very interesting to talk about the values on the skin and how stylization can go both ways, good and bad, when we try to shade the skin, and how we really need to be thinking about, you know, where those saturated colors should show through and why. It was a lot of fun. Hope it was really useful. I'm getting closer to maybe eventually opening up my overpaint tier, so we'll see about that. Still not opening it yet. I may change the price on it though, to avoid having such a huge overflow of submissions later on, but yeah, maybe next month I'll already be accepting new submissions. So we'll see about that. But for now, this is it. Thank you guys for watching and I'll see you in the next video. Bye! Interesting, I think this was the first overpaint in a while where instead of making things darker to improve them, I was making them kind of brighter in many situations. Except for this hand. This hand really needed to go darker.